There is a strange kind of frustration that comes from knowing exactly what you need to do and still not doing it. Not because you're stupid, not because you're incapable, not because the information isn't available. You know, you know the habits that are weakening you. You know the distractions that are keeping you average. You know the version of yourself you need to become when nobody's watching. And that is what makes it so painful. Because the problem is not that you don't have a vision. The problem is that your life keeps contradicting it. You say you want to become disciplined, but your days are chaotic. You say you want to build something meaningful, but your attention is constantly scattered. You say you want to be a man of God, but you keep being pulled back into the same patterns you said you were done with. You said you want a better life, but you keep living in a way that makes that life impossible. And after a while, that does something to you. You stop trusting yourself, not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly. Every time you break another promise to yourself, something inside you gets weaker. Every time you say tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes the same as yesterday, your self respect takes another hit. And eventually, you reach this uncomfortable place where you're not just tired of your habits, you're tired of being the kind of person who keeps allowing them. That is where monk mode starts to make sense. Not as some internet trend, not as a fantasy where you disappear into the mountains and return as Batman, but as a season where you finally stop negotiating with the weaker version of yourself. A season where you remove the noise. A season where you simplify your life. A season where your environment stops being built around escape and starts being built around becoming. Because maybe the reason your life has not changed yet is not because you lack potential. Maybe it's because you have never given your potential a serious environment to grow in. Let's talk about it. And maybe the place to start is with the part nobody really admits out loud. You've probably had this moment before. It's late, you're lying in bed, you've wasted another evening. Your phone is still in your hand. You're tired, but not in the satisfying way. Not the kind of tired that comes from effort, the kind of tired that comes from avoidance. And there's this quiet thought in the back of your mind: this is not who I'm supposed to be. Not in a dramatic way, just in the honest way a man knows when he's drifting. Because you've been here before. You've had the motivational phase. You've made the plan. You've deleted the apps. You've told yourself this time will be different. You've watched the videos. You've listened to the podcasts. You've probably even written the goals down. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, something changes. You train. You wake up earlier. You feel sharper. You start thinking, okay, this is it now. I'm finally becoming that guy. And then slowly, almost embarrassingly, the old version comes back. One late night, one skipped workout, one weekend where you let things slide, one bad week that somehow becomes a bad month. And before you know it, you're not building anymore. You're back in recovery mode, back in distraction, back in the same loop, starting over again, and again, and again. At some point, the pain is not even the failure, it's the repetition. It's knowing that you're capable of more, but having very little evidence that you can sustain it. That is a uniquely painful place to live, because potential is only encouraging for so long. After a while, unused potential starts to feel like accusation. And the reason that hits is because you're probably not the guy who has never tried. You've probably tried a lot. I want you to tell me if this sounds familiar. I mean, very similar to kind of what I was speaking on in the little text I was reading. You've been trying for so long. You've watched all the videos. You used to watch Hamza, you watched Iman, you watched Ali Abdal, any kind of self-improvement content you could get your hands on. You started implementing these routines. You started to optimize your life. You've been listening to Chris Williamson and Andrew Huberman, and you've been learning, you need to wake up in the morning, get sunlight, no coffee in the first 90 days, not 90 days, first 90 minutes of the day. And you put together a plan. You've put together many plans, and you got excited. You did things for a while, but eventually it all just kind of burnt out. It just fizzled out. You were consistent for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and eventually it stopped. You never stopped thinking about these habits that you want to implement and what these habits can give you. Because if you're anything like me, from the first moment you heard about self-improvement, you were like, jackpot. I don't have to live life like this forever. My life can actually change. and the power is in my hands if I can just get myself to do it. And I don't have the excuse of not having information, right? This isn't like 200 years ago where, first of all, people weren't really talking about self improvement. But if I wanted to learn like how to, I don't know, how to be better at my job or how to put on muscle, I needed to go to like the library or something and get a book. Now you've got a wealth of information in your hands, in your pocket, and you've got the best of the best people. Like you got people like Dr. Andrew Huberman, man. That guy's like 50 something. He's spent his whole life doing neuroscience, and you've got so many. You got Jordan Peterson. You got all these people, right? That you, to get access to them, you needed to go like study at Stanford or Harvard or whatever it is. You need to go to these special schools just to get access to somebody like that, and you've just got a wealth, hours and hours of information at your feet, and you can just go click on a few buttons and you've got that. If you need to fix a specific problem, you can go and fix that. If I'm gymming, let's just use this as an example. If you're gymming and you're like, man, my biceps aren't really growing as well as I'd like them to, let me go find out, you know, what I can do to actually increase. What am I doing wrong, in my gym session that I'm not actually hitting my biceps? You can go find that if you want. And with AI, I mean, it's even greater. So you've got the knowledge of what you need to do, and you've put together a plan, and you've got this vision of the life you want, but you just don't do it. If I don't know about you, but for me, that's painful. It really is painful because it's like I can't blame anyone. You can't blame anyone. You can't blame, the circumstances or whatever the case is. You've got everything you need. You just need to get up and do it. But you're not doing it, and time passes, and eventually gets to a point where you're like, man, I've wasted so much time. I could have been so far right now. And how much longer is this going to go on? I mean, I'm speaking about this because it's my story. And I'm sitting here at 24 and I'm like, I started watching self improvement a long, long time ago. I think sporadically in my high school days, but then in university, I really like locked in. I went on a nice bulk and a cut, and I was locked in. I learned how to do this thing like content creation, and I got some success with it, but I just didn't take it far enough, as far as I would have liked to. And then I started working, and then when you start working, you just don't have that much time. And I think I spoke about that in my last video, the video before, how you just don't have that kind of time, and you start to see your life kind of fizzling away, and you need to fight even harder just to get that back. And after sitting with that for a while, this is the conclusion that I keep coming back to. The problem is not that you don't know what to do. That would almost be easier. If the issue was ignorance, you could fix it with information. But you already have the information. You know the habits. You know the trade-offs. You know the version of yourself that would be waiting on the other side of consistency. The real problem is that your life is structured in a way that makes the weaker version of you too easy to access. Distraction is way too close. Escape too available. Your goals are too vague. Your environment is too forgiving, and your standards are too negotiable. So you don't need another motivational phase. You don't need a period of your life where the excuses are removed before they even have a chance to speak. Or you need a period of your life where the excuses are removed before they even have a chance to speak. That is what monk mode is supposed to be. But this is also where people get it wrong. The reason monk mode fails for most people is because they treat it like a mood. They get inspired, they feel disgusted with their current life. They watch a video that makes them want to disappear for 90 days and come back unrecognizable. And for a moment, it feels powerful because the fantasy is attractive. No distractions, no wasted time, no weak habits. Just you, your goals, your discipline, and some future version of yourself that everybody suddenly respects. But that is where a lot of people get it wrong. They fall in love with the idea of monk mode before they understand the architecture of it. Because monk mode is not magic. It is not a personality. It is not a hoodie, a dark room, a gym montage, and a playlist. Monk mode is a designed environment. It is a launch protocol. And if you don't build it properly, you don't transform. You just isolate yourself for a few weeks, burn out, and return to the same life with slightly more guilt. The best way I've heard this explained is with the idea of a launch. So I heard Imam Ghazi speaking about this. I'm shamelessly taking this idea from him. The idea of astronauts before they go to space, they have a period like a few months where they're just preparing to launch and go into space. And they know, obviously, when you're in space, well, one, there's no returning, right? There's no returning at that specific point. You've gone up there to do what you need to do. But also, the environment is very different. So, in order to get into that mentality, they need to kind of mimic the environment they're going to have up there here. They have a launch date, so they have a date that they know, okay, cool, we're going to go to space on this day, so we need to be ready. In order to be ready, we need to do this and that. Cool. In order to do that, let's create an environment where that becomes the goal, and for like a couple of months, that is all they're focused on, right? I don't know the details, what astronauts get up to, but the idea remains the same. There's a goal, there's a date that it's going to finish, and they need to prepare for that, right? And I think that's very important when it comes to monk mode, because a lot of us, when we watch videos on monk mode, it is just kind of something exciting to do. It's like, oh man, it would be so cool, if I could just be locked in, no distractions, I could just hide away from the world and just build myself, right? But we don't treat it like a mission. We just treat it as just something uh, nice to do. And I think that's the second part I want to speak on in this is you got to be intentional. So again, I think that's why the astronaut analogy is so pertinent, because they have a goal. There's a specific date. First of all, there's a date it's going to end. But that monk mode has a purpose. It's not just monk mode for the sake of monk mode. It's not just me hiding away from the world so I can enjoy being in isolation and feel like I'm being productive. There's actually a day that's going to come, a day of reckoning that's going to come, where all the work you've been preparing for actually comes to fruition. And that's the important part within monk mode, right? Is that we need to be intentional with it, right? There needs to be a date where it's going to end. There needs to be a certain goal it's achieving, and there needs to be certain steps that are being taken to make sure that it's being achieved. You want to get to a place where you can measure. I know that there's this idea that you would have known if you've watched any kind of self-improvement video, especially back in like the 2010s or in the late 2010s. The SMART goals thing, right? One of the things is that it's specific. Okay, it's specific, measurable, and then you've got attainable. I forgot what the R is, and then there's timely. But specific and measurable is so important, because that's where our goals kind of fall apart, when we're not measuring them. And for me, this is one of the good things I've learned just from like working in a very tough environment, right? Like I work in audit, and it's a lot like if you imagine somebody working as a lawyer. Like your hours are just like you need to answer for your hours, or you're gonna get crapped on, right? And it's just this thing of like, cool, you can be planned on an audit, say for a few weeks, right? You have certain tasks you're supposed to finish. When that audit finishes, and it's not even just at the end. It happens depending on obviously the structure of the team. It can happen on a daily basis, weekly basis, whatever. But you best believe there's going to come a time when you need to answer for all the hours you spend, right? It's like, what's your output? And it can be very difficult, like answering that kind of question, because it puts pressure on you to actually like get stuff done, and it doesn't take into account, all the other kind of fluff that affects your ability to get the job done. But the mission remains the same, right? You've been planned for this amount of time, you spend time working on this thing, where's the output? And I think it's important for us to bring that into our monk mode, just into life in general, honestly. And I think this is one of the things that separates people that actually achieve things and people that don't, right? Because we can all dream. We all want to be something specific, right? We all want to level up or whatever the case is, right? We all have things we want. But the difference between those of us that get those things and those of us that don't is, I think, intentionality, right? Like people that want to get something, they hold themselves to a specific standard, and they measure that. And I think that's an important thing to have in monk mode, is that monk mode isn't just there for you to just have a period where you can just disappear and just not be there. Like, cool, you're disappearing for a purpose, right? But when you come back, make sure it's achieving what you wanted to achieve. And I think that the other part that's very important as well, that we don't take into account in monk mode, is that you need to choose in advance what will suffer. And man, I remember listening to it's Chris Williamson. I remember listening to his podcast, and that's why I learned this thing, choose in advance what will suffer. But there's also this thing he always says about how you can have anything you want in the world, but you can't have everything. And I think that's an idea that's lost in our current day and age. we have this thing of like, you can get everything you want, don't settle, yada yada yada, right? You can achieve the world, but it's just not practical, and I think it shoots a lot of us in the foot. Geez, my nose is a bit congested. Let me just drink some water. But that idea of choosing in advance what will suffer is very important, because I've heard David Goggins as well say another variation of this where he says you need to be unbalanced for a while. And I know it comes across, it's coming from someone like David Goggins, it comes across as actually unreasonable. And it's like, oh, you need to be like just all in, like not taking into account, the challenges you're going to face in life. But it's true. Like if you want to achieve a certain level of success, you need to be unbalanced for a while. So just picture somebody who wants to be like really successful in a business, right? Because this is kind of the number one analogy for this, right? It's like a hustle culture thing, right? Just somebody you want to build something like a business. That kind of person isn't going to build a thriving business and have a crazy social life and be jacked, and be getting optimal sleep. Like there's just not enough hours in the day to do all of that, and you need to choose in advance. Cool. Think of it as like video game sliders. You've kind of, I don't know how to explain this picture. There's this one picture. It's like a circle, and it's kind of got all the attributes. It's got shooting, passing, dribbling, physicality, defense, whatever. And it kind of like draws a diagram where it's like, if the person's got like 99 shooting or whatever, it's like right close to the circle. And then if they have like 50, it's like closer to the middle. Think of it like that. You've kind of got that circle. Or let me just use video game sliders, because I think that picture is a lot more translatable for people watching. Think of video game sliders where it's like, cool, if I want to go up to 99 over here, I might need to drop a little bit over here. And if I want to go, and it's just playing a balancing game, and not, oh, you need to have a balanced life and all that stuff, right? Because what you're trying to achieve is not easy, right? It's gonna require significant focus and resource investment. I think that's the word I'm looking for. You're gonna need to invest your time and energy into specific things, and you can't achieve everything at the highest intensity at the same time. You just can't, right? You need to kind of stagger it. You'd be like, cool, for this season, I'm going to be focused on building this thing. This is going to be my number one thing, and then I'm maybe going to have these two things that I'll try to like keep up. Then this thing is just probably just going to fall to the wayside for a bit. And you need to decide what that is. That's part of being intentional. What are you trying to get out of monk mode? And then the other part is the dark side of monk mode. When it comes to monk mode, I think a lot of people don't realize how addicting it is, because it can become so easy to just use it as an excuse to pull away from the world. It's supposed to be this thing that you're kind of taking out all distractions so you can actually focus on building what you want to build, right? Building something specific. But you become so addicted to the fact that, oh man, I actually don't have to show up for my social obligations or go do this, and that. I can just chill by myself. And that becomes dangerous, because now you never reintegrate, right? And I'm just trying to look for this quote that I actually have here. Yes. So without being intentional, which is kind of the whole theme on this monk mode thing, right? Monk mode just becomes vague isolation with better branding. Private practice only matters if it eventually becomes public performance. Monk mode should train you to return stronger, not give you an excuse to hide. I think that's the most important thing, because it feels like a nice excuse for somebody who doesn't want to deal with the problems of social integration and social life. To, again, monk mode just becomes vague isolation with better branding. You're just pulling away from the world, and you've given yourself this tag of, I'm going to be productive. So I think it's important that you realize that there is a dark side to it, and you need to focus on making sure you do reintegrate at some point. So that's the distinction that matters. The unobvious truth about monk mode is that it does not work because you disappear. It works because you disappear with a purpose. There's a difference between isolation and preparation. Isolation removes you from the world. Preparation equips you to return to it stronger. And that distinction matters, because if monk mode becomes a place to hide, it'll make you smaller. But if non-point becomes a place to train, it can make you dangerous in the best possible way. The goal is not to vanish. The goal is to remove yourself from the noise long enough to become the kind of man who can re-enter the world with clarity, strength, and direction. This is why you need a mission. This is why you need a launch date. And that is why you need to stop treating monk mode like motivation and start treating it like preparation. And the reason this matters is because you probably don't have as much time to keep restarting as you think. Here's the part that should probably make you uncomfortable. You've already tried to change. Not once, many times. And if nothing changes now, there's a very real chance that the next few years of your life will look almost identical to the last few. I want to repeat that part. And if nothing changes now, there's a very real chance that the next few years of your life will look almost identical to the last few. Same intentions, same restarts, same private frustration, same gap between the man you talk about becoming and the man your habits are actually building. That is the danger. Not that your life collapses overnight. That would at least get your attention. The danger is that nothing dramatic happens at all. You just keep drifting, quietly, respectably, comfortably. And one day you realize that the life you're living is not the result of one massive failure. It is the result of tolerated inconsistency repeated for years. And that is where your timeline starts to matter. This other idea, I think that's also important in our day and age, is extending your timeline. We all watch people online and you see, I've spoken about this thing before, but the challenge with social media is that you've got everybody that's showing off the best part of their lives, right? And from this pool that you have of everybody that's showing off the best part of their lives, social media kind of pulls to the top, the top 1% of the top 1%, right? It's like the best of the best you get to see there. The people who are living the best lives at the youngest, and it's just perfect. It's picture perfect, right? Never mind the full picture of what their lives actually look like, but you've just kind of got this selected percentage of people that you are just in your face the whole time. And the way our brain works is the people you see around you, you're like, oh man, this person's my age, they must be my peer. And it's so interesting because you need to realize that a lot of these people aren't your peers, right? If I'm looking at somebody who's 22 and they're making 100 million or whatever it is. First of all, I don't know their life circumstances. They've grown up in a different place. Maybe they've grown up really poor, or maybe they've grown up rich. Whatever the case is, they've grown up somewhere different. And now I'm looking at them being my age, and it's like, man, they built themselves this thing. I should also be able to build myself this thing. They're my peer. Like you instantly just comparing yourself to this person. And that's one of the dangers, I think, is that not everyone is your peer. There's some people who just live different lives. They're not the same person as you. But now you hold yourself to a standard that isn't realistic, but also something that's very nefarious that I've heard about with like social media is that a lot of the desires we have aren't actually ours. Like they're being kind of manufactured. And this is the scary thing with the algorithms, right? Because the algorithms are kind of self-attuning, right? It's not as much as it was, 10 years ago where you had people specifically tweaking the algorithm. They still are, but they've tweaked it so well to the point where it self-regulates. It figures out what's best for attention on the platforms. And one of the ways it can do that is by predicting what you want to watch, right? That's one of the ways it works, is it wants to predict what you're going to watch, based on the videos you watch, the people you watch. It can say, cool, based on this data, I can kind of guess that this person's going to watch, they like this video. But the other part is, what's better than predicting what somebody's going to watch? Engineer what they want to watch, right? So it actually starts to, I don't know how they do this. I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but they're actually changing the things we want to see. And that's where things like politics and all that stuff come in, right? Because obviously when you're on social media, the things that are going to get the biggest rise out of you is going to be polarizing things, right? So the things that make you angry, or sad or happy, whatever, things that just bring your emotions out in whatever way. And they know what kind of things do that. And then from there, they start to kind of engineer what you want. But I'm going kind of on a tangent now. But the point I'm trying to make is that stop trying to set yourself these goals that are, you must achieve everything within the next 2 years, otherwise you're a failure. Because Look back, man. Look back to the last 2 years, the last 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. You've been setting yourself these goals that you want to achieve in short periods of time and you haven't achieved them. What would have happened if 5 years ago you actually said, no, let me start, I have this goal I want to achieve. Let me spend the next 2 years just focusing on this one thing. Let me spend the next 2 years focusing on this other thing, and then the next year focusing on this other thing. And instead of saying, no, I need to do this thing in a year and I need to do these other things in the next year, and then within 2 years I'm done, and then nothing actually changes. What would have happened if you just went back and set yourself a realistic timeline? Because ultimately, you don't need to achieve everything within the next 2 years. I mean, you can't, but you don't need to. And I think that's an important thing, is to extend your timeline in relation to your goals. And I think that makes things a lot more sustainable, but also more achievable. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point I'm trying to make around, the fact that you've been trying to change for years. If you have been trying to change for years and your life still looks the same, at some point you have to stop blaming the plan and start questioning the seriousness of your execution. So the move is not to lower the standard, it is to lengthen the horizon. You need to extend your timeline because transformation is not built at the speed of your insecurity. The part of you that feels behind wants everything, and it wants everything now. The body, the money, the confidence, the relationship, the platform, the purpose, the respect. But the man who actually gets those things is usually built much more slowly than that. Through months when nobody notices, through habits that feel boring, through repetitions that do not feel cinematic, through obedience when the emotional reward is not immediate. That is where your identity changes. Not in the announcement, not in the plan, not in the first week where everything feels exciting, but in the quiet middle, when the novelty has disappeared and you're still doing what you said you would do. That is the part most people never survive. And that is why they never change. So if that's true, then the question becomes very practical. The question is not, should you do monk mode? The question is, can you build one that actually works? Because a badly designed monk mode becomes another failed phase. But a properly designed one can become the reason where your life starts moving in the direction you kept saying it could and that it should. And it starts with one question. What are you preparing to launch? Not vaguely, not aesthetically, specifically. Who are you trying to become? What are you trying to build? What does the man on the other side of this season actually do every day? Because once you know that, the structure becomes much simpler. You stop asking, what should I add? And you start asking, what does this version of me require? So how do we do this practically? So I've got kind of 5 points that you take into account when you want to build your monk mode. And it's start with the vision, set the launch date, design the environment, choose 3 to 5 non-negotiables, and choose what you're willing to suck at. So the first part is very important because if you don't get this part right, then everything else kind of collapses, right? And you want to make clear something right. You want to make clear what you want or who you want to be and what the mission is, right? What's the kind of person you're trying to build? Who does he look like? And what is the mission? What are you trying to achieve? Right? Once you get that clear, everything else kind of falls into line because it's aimed at a specific goal and you know what that goal requires. And then that kind of dictates everything else. The second part being set the launch date. Now, I've heard it said before, a nice period of monk mode is 3 to 6 months. And if you're anything like me, it's always a bit weird thinking about that because I'm like, man, I want to do monk mode, fix my life, come out, and then never have to do monk mode again. And that's just not how it works, right? That's just not how it works at all. I mean, kind of what we're speaking on in this video is this idea of like, you need to be unbalanced in certain periods. So design your monk mode in a manner that works. Maybe you want to do it 3 months and then take 3 months off, and then 3 months and then 3 months off, whatever the case is, right? But make sure there's a date that it ends because that makes it more likely that you're actually going to follow through with what you want to do because the time just keeps, closing. That gap keeps closing. Whereas if you make a monk mode into perpetuity, then you're not really going to feel the sense of urgency. You're not going to be intentional. And then you kind of just fall apart and you don't do anything with it. So it's important to set the launch date, the date. Oof. My camera. I'm going to fix this. There we go. It's important for you to set the time that you actually want it to end because then you become intentional, and you get urgency from it. And it doesn't become this thing where you're like just hiding from everything. It becomes an intentional thing with a purpose that it's supposed to achieve. Then the third part is you want to design the environment. I think I remember earlier in one of the things I wrote, was saying that you have an environment that's too forgiving. And for me, that, yeah, that that hits home. Right? It's like the environment we set ourselves in is way too forgiving. We think of like the military. There's a reason why something like the military is so attractive, because it's a place where you get to go and you just get transformed like almost immediately, it seems, right? And the idea behind that is it's the environment, and you want to design an environment that makes it almost impossible for you to fail, right? If you're doing this monk mode, cool. What are you trying to achieve? Oh, you want to start, I want to start a YouTube channel, right? Cool. I need to film videos, on this day. I need to plan on this day. I need to, upload and create thumbnails and stuff on this day. Cool. What kind of environment do you want to have that allows that to happen? What kind of, I don't know if you want somebody to hold you accountable, whatever it is. The world is your oyster, right? But design an environment that makes it impossible for you to miss the goal. Then you want to choose your 3 to 5 non-negotiables. Again, in a similar theme to being intentional. What do you want to achieve from this monk mode? Have 3 to 5 things that you're like, these things are not moving. Okay, cool. I need to wake up at this time and sleep at this time every single day. That's one of them. Cool. I need to do that because I need the mornings to spend my time doing this. Fine. I need to spend at least 2 hours every day, or how many hours you want to give yourself to work on that specific thing. I know Imam Ghazi calls it like an income producing activity, right? You presumably want to use this time to change your life, and you want to learn how to provide value to the world. Then that's that thing. What's your main thing that you're like, cool, I want to learn this skill. I want to sharpen this skill. Cool, that's your number 2. And then maybe you want to have a third one where you're like, I gym or whatever, or I don't eat crap, or I don't go on my phone for the first 2 hours in the morning, or whatever it is, right? But set those non-negotiables. Again, don't make the list this long, because then you're not going to do anything with it. You want to set clear non-negotiables that are informed by the goal that you're setting. And then fifth, I went over this earlier, you want to choose in advance what you want to be willing to suck at. Because if you try to become excellent at everything in the same season, you're not going to achieve anything. You're not going to meet any one of those goals, right? Every serious season has a cost. So choose the cost consciously. You're going to pay in some way, right? Something's going to take a knock for what you're trying to achieve, right? Pick that. Don't let it be chosen for you. And because if it gets chosen for you, it's likely going to be one of the things you don't want, to take a cost or to take the hit, right? And when you strip all of that down, monk mode becomes much simpler than people make it. A proper monk mode is not complicated. It is simple. But simple does not mean easy. You define the man you're trying to become. You choose the mission. You set the date. You remove the noise. You build the environment. You choose the non-negotiables. You accept the trade-offs. And then you repeat the same boring, obvious, unglamorous actions long enough for them to start becoming your identity. That is the part people underestimate. They want monk mode to feel cinematic, but most of it will not. Most of it will look like waking up when you said you would, training when you do not feel like it, opening your Bible before your phone, working on the thing when nobody cares yet, walking in silence instead of drowning out your thoughts, going to sleep instead of stealing another hour from tomorrow. That is not glamorous, but it is how a man is built. Quietly, repeatedly, privately, until the private evidence becomes too strong to ignore. And maybe that's the part worth ending on. In the end, monk mode is not really about disappearing. It is about returning. Returning to discipline, returning to clarity, returning to God, returning to the version of yourself you keep abandoning every time comfort gets loud. Because the truth is, you do not need another year of vague intentions. You do not need another motivational phase. You do not need to keep collecting information about the life you already know you should be building. At some point, you have to create the conditions where change becomes unavoidable. Not because you feel inspired every day, but because your life has been structured around the man you said you wanted to become. And maybe that is what makes monk mode so powerful. It gives you a season where the noise gets quieter, the excuses get weaker, the direction gets clearer, and the gap between your potential and your actual life finally starts to close. Because you have to do it properly. You cannot use monk mode as a hiding place. You cannot disappear forever. You cannot spend your whole life preparing and never launch. The point is not to become impressive in isolation. The point is to become strong enough to show up in the world differently, as a better man, a clearer man, a more disciplined man, a man who can be trusted with his own future. So maybe this is the season when you stop negotiating. Maybe this is the season when you stop restarting. Maybe this is the season where you finally build enough private evidence to respect yourself again. Because in the end, monk mode was never really about running away from your life. It was about becoming the kind of man who could finally live it properly. Let me know what you guys think of just this whole concept. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Make sure you subscribe to join the community. Until next time, see you boys.